Bennett Calloway was 44 years old, and he had spent the better part of 2 decades believing that a marriage, like a surgical procedure, succeeded or failed on preparation, on clarity of intent, on the steady hands of someone who had done the work long before the critical moment arrived. He had held that belief through residency, through the birth of 2 children, through 17 years of a marriage he had quietly, methodically stopped tending to. On a Wednesday evening in early March, he sat in his car in the parking garage of Houston Methodist, engine off, a manila envelope on the passenger seat. His attorney had prepared it over the course of 41 pages, the product of careful, unhurried work by a man who billed $400 an hour and had asked very few emotional questions. All it needed was Bennett's signature. He had a pen in his hand. He had been holding it for 11 minutes. What stopped him was not love. Not yet, anyway. What stopped him was a voicemail he had noticed on his phone while walking to the car. From his wife's sister, a woman named Sherelle, who had not called him directly in 3 years, whose voice, when he pressed play, said only, "Don't do anything yet. Please. I need to talk to you first." 7 words. He set the pen on top of the envelope and stared at the concrete pillar in front of the car until the garage lights flickered on automatically around him. He did not know it yet, but in less than 48 hours, he would hear something that would nearly confirm every quiet suspicion he had carried for 2 years. And then, something else entirely, something he was entirely unprepared for, that would make him put that envelope in a drawer and not open it again. But first, how they got here. If you have ever worked so hard to give someone a better life that you forgot to include them in it, stay with me. Luann Calloway was 41. She had grown up in Beaumont, Texas, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a man who drove long-haul trucks and came home smelling like diesel and distance. She had put herself through the University of Houston on a partial scholarship, and by the time Bennett met her at a faculty mixer, during his 2nd year of residency, she was running the development office for a mid-sized nonprofit that placed foster children with trained families. She had a laugh that arrived without warning and stayed longer than expected, and a way of listening that made people feel, accurately, that she was genuinely interested. Bennett had been 29, already serious in ways that sometimes read as remote. She had asked him a question at that mixer, something about what had made him choose cardiology, and he had given an honest answer instead of the polished one, and she had nodded slowly and said, "That makes sense. Most people give you the version they've rehearsed." He had thought, that's the one. For 12 of their 17 years, he still believed it without reservation. The last 5 had been quieter. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms so thoroughly that silence is simply another form of closeness. The other kind, the kind that accumulates the way scar tissue does, invisibly, layer by layer, until the range of motion is suddenly and measurably reduced. Bennett was a cardiothoracic surgeon. He understood, professionally, how a structure could appear intact from the outside while something critical was failing in the interior. He understood threshold pressures and the deceptive stability of a system that has compensated for damage so long it has forgotten what undamaged felt like. He had not, somehow, applied that understanding to his own household 3 years ago. The same month, he had been named chief of the cardiovascular surgery department at Houston Methodist, the youngest in the hospital's history. Luann had stood in the kitchen doorway while he took a congratulatory call from the hospital board and smiled at him from across the room. He had covered the mouthpiece, mouthed thank you, and returned to the call. He had not seen what her face did after he turned away. He had told himself she was proud. He had told himself a great many things that year, in the way a person does when the alternative is a conversation they do not yet feel equipped to have. What he had not told himself, what he was only now, alone in a dark parking garage, beginning to admit, was that the distance between them had not appeared suddenly. It had been building in increments so small they were nearly imperceptible. The dinner reservations she made that he canceled because of emergency surgeries, one of which was unavoidable, and 4 of which probably were not. The trip to Savannah she had suggested twice that he had never formally declined. He had simply not responded with any energy, and eventually she had stopped mentioning it. The conversations that ended with her saying it's fine in a tone that meant the precise opposite, but that he had chosen, deliberately, not to examine. Each silence was a small surrender. Stacked across 5 years, they made a wall neither of them had ever agreed to build. He pressed his palm flat against the manila envelope. Then he picked up his phone and called Sherelle back. She answered on the second ring. "I can't say this over the phone," she said. "Can you come by tomorrow morning? Before she's up?" He said yes before he had thought through the implications. He started the car and drove home through Houston's late-night sprawl. The refineries burning pale orange along the ship channel, the freeway overpass above Midtown, throwing shadows across the lanes, the particular amber glow of the medical center receding in his rear view, and the entire drive. He kept returning to the same question. What did Sherelle know that she needed to say in person? "Stay with me," because what Bennett Calloway heard the following morning would make him question everything he had concluded about his marriage, his wife, and how close both of them had come to making a decision neither could have undone alone. If your wife sat across from you tonight and admitted she had almost walked away, would you want to know the truth? Or would you rather have been left in the version of the story where you were the one who almost left first? Think about that. I'll be here when you decide. Sherelle arrived at their house in Meyerland at 7:15, 40 minutes before Luan typically woke. She was 2 years older than her sister, shorter, with the same eyes and none of the same patience for indirection. She sat across from Bennett at the kitchen island with her hands wrapped around a mug he had poured and said, without preamble, "She's been talking to someone." The word "someone" was doing considerable work in that sentence. "A man named Dwayne Prentice," Sherelle continued, before Bennett could organize a response. "He went to high school with us. He reached out to her on LinkedIn about 8 months ago. Professional at first, then not." Bennett set his own mug down. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the sound of the neighbor's sprinkler system cycling on outside. "How long have you known?" 6 weeks, Sherelle said. "She told me herself." She wasn't. A pause while she chose the word carefully. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asking me if she was wrong to want to feel chosen again. The phrase settled into the room. "She's not in love with him," Sherelle said. "She told me that directly. But she's been lonely, Bennett. The kind of lonely that's harder to explain than the regular kind, because it happens inside a marriage. And that kind is the worst kind, because you can't even say it out loud without feeling like an ingrate." He was quiet. The diagnostic part of his brain, the part that had been trained over 20 years to categorize information without reacting to it before the full picture was available, was running at low hum. Filing, organizing, waiting. "Why are you telling me?" he asked. "Because she asked me not to," Sherelle said. And for the first time since she sat down, her voice carried something other than composure. "And I'm telling you anyway because I know my sister. She didn't come to me because she wanted permission to leave. She came to me because she was hoping someone would give her a reason to stay. And she's not going to ask you for one. She's too proud. You know she's too proud." Bennett knew. He had always known. After Sherelle left, he sat at the kitchen island for a long time. The house made its morning sounds around him. The water heater, the AC clicking on, a car accelerating on the street outside. Normal infrastructure operating as designed, indifferent to what was happening inside. He was still sitting there when Luan came downstairs in a gray robe, hair loose, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, even though she had not been reading. She stopped when she saw him. "You're still here," she said. "Your rounds, I moved them," he said. She studied him for a moment with the particular alertness of a woman who has learned to read the specific texture of a silence before she walks into it. Then she moved to the coffee pot. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "about the Savannah trip." She stilled, her hand on the coffee pot handle. "You mentioned it last spring," he said. "And the spring before that." I didn't give you an answer." She turned to look at him, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who has prepared for disappointment for so long that they no longer know quite what to do with the absence of it. "I'd like to go," he said. "This month, if you're willing." A pause. "Okay," she said. Her voice was careful. The word landed differently than he wanted it to, but he understood why. Trust doesn't restore itself on request. It restores over time, in small, verifiable increments. He drove to the hospital. Operated on 2 patients, both unremarkable in the technical sense, both requiring everything he had anyway. He ate lunch at his desk and did not taste it. He returned 3 calls he had been avoiding and made one that wasn't strictly necessary. A check-in with the department's patient family coordinator, a woman named Paulette. He stopped himself. He had been so accustomed to being the person at the center of every room he entered professionally that he had stopped noticing when he was absent from the rooms that mattered most. He drove home that evening, thinking not about Dwayne Prentice, whose existence he had filed into the category of information requiring a measured response rather than a reactive one, but about the Savannah trip that had been proposed and quietly shelved twice, about the dinner reservations that had been canceled, about how many times, in how many small ways, he had communicated to his wife, not with words, but with the accumulated weight of his attention being somewhere else. That, the life she was trying to build with him, was less urgent than the life he was building for both of them. He thought about what Sherelle had said, the kind of lonely that happens inside a marriage. He had studied the heart for 20 years. He knew better than most people that the organ itself does not feel. The sensation of heartbreak, of longing, of the specific grief of being invisible to someone who is physically present. All of that is neurological, processed in the prefrontal cortex, stored in the amygdala, expressed through the body as something that feels entirely physical, but originates in interpretation. He knew all of that. He had not used any of it to understand his own wife. 3 days later, he came home from an evening shift to find the house quiet. Their younger son at a friend's, their older one at college in Austin, and Luane on the back porch in the dark with a glass of wine, and the particular stillness of someone who has been sitting with something for a while. He brought his own glass outside and sat in the other chair without asking whether it was welcome, leaving a deliberate distance. 2 people on a back porch in the humid March evening, the Houston skyline barely visible through the live oaks, a neighbor's television murmuring through the fence. She spoke first, which surprised him. "I haven't been fair to you," she said. He waited. "I've been angry at you for being absent," she said, "and I never told you what I needed. I just pulled back and waited to see if you'd notice." A pause. "That's not fair. That's not a strategy. That's just punishing someone for a crime you never told them they were committing." He turned to look at her, the profile of a woman who was working very hard at honesty, because she had decided it was the only thing left worth trying. "I know about Dwayne Prentice," he said. The silence that followed was of a specific and particular kind. Not the silence of guilt discovered, the silence of something that had been suspended at considerable psychic cost finally being allowed to land. She closed her eyes. "Sherelle," she said, not as an accusation, as a recognition. "She loves you," he said. "I know she does." Luan set her glass on the arm of the chair. "Bennett, I didn't." "I know," he said. "I know you didn't." "But I listened to him," she said. "He said things that felt true, even when I knew he wasn't the right person to be saying them. He said I was settling, that I deserved more, that I was disappearing inside someone else's career and calling it a marriage." Her voice was steady, but barely. And the worst part was that I couldn't entirely disagree with him, not because he was right about leaving, but because some of what he said about how I'd been feeling, he wasn't wrong about that. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of response, but the deliberate making of space for something that deserves one. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I was trying to decide," she said, "whether there was anything left to tell it to." That landed accurately and without softening, the way the truth does when someone finally stops packaging it for easier consumption. He let it stay. Then he said, "I turned down the department directorship." She turned to look at him. "The regional expansion role," he said. 4 hospitals across 3 states. They offered it to me in January. He reached into his jacket and produced his phone, pulled up an email chain, held the screen so she could read. The original offer, the compensation structure, the scope, and his reply, dated 6 weeks prior, 2 lines, respectful, final. "I'm grateful for the consideration. The role is not the right fit at this time." She read it twice. "You said no to this," she said slowly. "The travel alone was 40% of the year," he said. "We were all ready." He paused. "I wasn't willing to find out what we'd become with me gone 4 months out of 12. She was looking at him the way a person looks at something they had given up, expecting to find. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't want you carrying the weight of it," he said. "I made a decision I could live with, and I thought that was enough." "Bennett." Her voice was quiet and very direct. "That's the same thing you've been doing for 5 years, deciding what I can handle, deciding what I need to know, making choices for us without including me in the conversation." She wasn't angry. She was something more complicated than angry. She was exhausted by a pattern she could finally name. "Even the generous things you do them alone. And then I'm supposed to understand their significance without ever having been in the room where you decided." He sat with that. It was precisely true. He had spent 20 years making high-stakes decisions quickly, cleanly, from a position of expertise. He had, without meaning to, imported that methodology into his marriage, deciding what was needed, implementing, presenting the outcome. Never once pausing to ask whether the other person in the room wanted to be consulted rather than provided for. "I've been treating you like a patient," he said, with a kind of quiet horror at the accuracy of it. She gave a short, soft, exhausted sound that was not quite a laugh. "Yes," she said. "You've been very attentive. You've been very thorough, and I have never once felt like your partner." The humidity pressed in around them. A car passed on the street beyond the fence. The Houston night hummed with its usual indifference to everything that was happening on this particular back porch. "I don't want to file those papers," he said. She looked at him. "I've had them since February," he said. "I didn't file them because—" He stopped. "Tried again. Because I kept waiting for the version of this where I was wrong, where there was still something I'd missed." "And," she said. "And Sherelle called me," he said. "And I found out I had in fact missed quite a lot." A silence. Then she said, "What do you want?" The question was simple enough to be frightening. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not to go back to what we had, because what we had wasn't working for you, and I should have seen that sooner. I mean, actually differently. A therapist. Honest conversations about the things we've both been deciding in private. No more unilateral kindness." He looked at her directly. "I need you to tell me what you need. Out loud. Even when it's uncomfortable. I can't work from a chart I've never seen." She considered him. The way she used to consider things back when she was still bringing her real opinions into the same room as his. "I want to feel like I'm in the marriage with you," she said. "Not like a beneficiary of decisions you've already made." "I know," he said. "That's on me. It's on both of us," she said. "I stopped asking. I convinced myself that asking was the same as begging. And I would rather—" She stopped, looked at the dark yard. "I would rather have been slowly invisible than risk asking for something and having you not respond. Which tells you more about my fear than your failure. But it's still the truth." He reached across the small distance between the chairs. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. They sat there until the neighbors' lights went off one by one, until the street settled into its late-night quiet, until the glass of wine she'd poured was long finished, and neither of them had moved to go inside. When they finally did, she paused at the door. "I blocked him," she said. "2 days ago. Before you said anything tonight." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Sherelle told me that too," he said. A pause. Then, for the first time in a very long time, she laughed. The real one, the one that arrived without announcement, the one that stayed. He had forgotten, somewhere in the accumulation of the last 5 years, how much of his day that laugh used to organize. The therapist's name was Dr. Adeza Obi. Her office was in Montrose, on a tree-lined street, where the bungalows had wide front porches, and the practice of someone who understood that the most important conversations usually happened in the quietest rooms. Bookshelves, floor to ceiling. 2 chairs angled toward each other at a distance that was designed to feel neither too intimate nor too clinical. Bennett appreciated the calibration immediately. He was a man who respected environments built with intention. They sat side by side on a deep gray sofa, not touching, but near enough that the space between them was a choice rather than a default. Dr. Obi opened without preamble. "Tell me, in your own words, what you believe you lost." Bennett went first. "I stopped narrating my intentions," he said. "I was doing things for us. Financial decisions, professional decisions, but I was doing them silently. And silence, I've learned, isn't neutral. In a marriage, it tends to be interpreted as distance." Dr. Obi wrote something. Then she looked at Luane. Luane looked at her hands, then at the window. The early spring light coming in pale and clean across the wooden floor. "I stopped believing he was still choosing me," she said. "And instead of asking if that was true, I started behaving as though it was already confirmed. I restructured my whole emotional life around an assumption I never actually tested. The term for this, in the psychological literature, is anticipatory grief, the process by which the mind begins mourning a loss before it has occurred, protecting itself from a pain that may not, in fact, be coming. It is adaptive, in theory. In practice, it often manufactures the very absence it is trying to prepare for." Dr. Obi let that settle. "What I'm hearing," she said, "is that you were both grieving the same relationship at the same time, in private, and that the grief itself became part of what was breaking it. A kind of self-fulfilling erosion." Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Luan said quietly, "There's something I haven't told him." "Not completely." Bennett kept his hands still on his knees. "Dwayne Prentice called me," she said. "Twice. In January, I didn't answer either time, but I listened to the voicemails." She looked at Bennett directly, with the steady gaze of someone who has rehearsed this but is not reciting it, someone who is choosing accountability over comfort. "The second message I listened to 3 times. He said I was wasting my life being grateful for a man who took me for granted. He said I deserved someone who would actually see me." A breath. "And I kept listening because some part of me wanted someone, anyone, to say that I mattered, not him specifically. Just the sentence." Bennett looked at her. "Did any part of you want to call him back?" The question was direct and without inflection. The question of a man who would rather know. "No," she said, "but I kept his contact in my phone for 2 weeks before I deleted it. And that's the honest version. The version where I don't make myself sound cleaner than I was." He exhaled, long and deliberate. "Thank you," he said, "for saying that." She blinked. "I mean it," he said. "I need the real version, not the one that spares me." Dr. Obi let them sit in it. Then, "Bennett, in the past year, were there decisions you made about this marriage, or your career as it relates to this marriage, that you made without her input?" He reached into his jacket, produced his phone, set it on the coffee table, and opened the email thread. Turned the screen toward Luan. She read it, stopped partway down, read the last paragraph of his reply. Looked up. "You turned this down," she said. "This was 3 months ago." "February 14th, he said. "They needed an answer by end of business." "You were in surgery on Valentine's Day," she said slowly. 14-hour procedure, he said. "I called them from the attending lounge at 11:15 p.m. and told them no." She stared at him. The expression on her face was layered in ways that took a moment to separate. Disbelief, something close to grief, and underneath both of those, a fragile, carefully undefended gratitude. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want it to become a debt, he said. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something for a decision I made because it was right, I thought. He stopped. I thought making the right call was enough, that the outcome would speak for itself. Bennett, Dr. Obi said gently, what Luane is describing, the feeling of being excluded from major decisions, even generous ones, that's a form of disconnection. It communicates, even unintentionally, that her input isn't required, that you're managing the marriage rather than sharing it. He nodded. He had arrived at the same conclusion 3 nights ago on a back porch in Meyerland. But hearing it articulated by someone trained to name these mechanisms gave it a different kind of weight. I've been solving for outcomes, he said, when what she needed was to be in the room. Yes, Dr. Obi said. Luane's phone lit up on the cushion beside her. She glanced at it. Her expression shifted. A kind of weary recognition. She turned the screen so Bennett could see. A text from Dwayne Prentice. Last chance at something real. Don't say I didn't offer. Bennett read it, set the phone face down on the coffee table. And to his own surprise, and to Luan's, and to Dr. Obi's mild and professional interest, he felt something that was not anger, not contempt, not the territorial impulse of a man whose domain has been encroached upon. He felt, with a clarity that was almost clinical, a kind of certainty about the difference between what that message represented and what was actually in this room. He's going to keep doing that, Bennett said, until you make it stop. He looked at Luane. But that's yours to decide, not mine. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone, opened the message thread, and blocked the number. She did it without drama, without announcement, with the efficient finality of someone closing something that no longer required a decision. She set the phone face down again. Dr. Obi said, I think what's happening in this room is quite significant. You've both just demonstrated, in real time, something that took most of our sessions to work toward, the ability to make decisions together, in the open, without one person managing the other. They walked out into the Montrose afternoon, a warm day for March, the kind of weather Houston produces to remind you that spring here is a matter of degree rather than category. The live oaks were losing their old leaves to make room for the new growth, which is how they do it in this part of Texas. An evergreen that briefly looks deciduous, constantly renewing without ever fully stopping. They did not hold hands on the sidewalk. That would have been premature. But they walked close enough that their arms nearly touched, and neither of them adjusted the distance. Bennett thought about how they must have looked from outside. 2 people walking out of an unassuming building on a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable from any external vantage point. No visible trace of the manila envelope in a desk drawer, or the back porch conversation, or the voicemails, listened to 3 times in a dark car. Some of the most consequential things a marriage survives are entirely invisible to anyone not inside it. In the car, Luane said, he's not going to give up easily. Bennett started the engine. No, he agreed. Probably not. Does that bother you? He checked his mirrors, pulled out of the parking space. Not even a little, he said. But Dwayne Prentice had one more move left. A public one, engineered for maximum visibility, and it would force Luane to say something she had not known she was ready to say until the moment it was required of her. The Houston Medical Foundation's annual gala was held at the Houstonian Hotel Ballroom in mid-April. White tablecloths, tall floral arrangements, the kind of ambient energy that attends events where the city's medical and civic establishment comes to separate itself and call it philanthropy. Bennett wore a dark suit. Luan wore a deep burgundy dress, not new, one he had given her for her birthday 4 years ago, that she had mentioned once she was saving for something worth wearing it to. He noticed. He noticed immediately and said nothing, because some things are said more clearly by attention than explanation. They arrived together and crossed the ballroom threshold together, and when Bennett placed his hand at the small of her back, she leaned into it by about half an inch. A barely perceptible lean, the kind that is entirely voluntary. He noticed that too. Dwayne Prentice arrived at 8:40. Bennett clocked him at the entrance. Tailored suit, practiced entrance, the particular energy of a man who needs a room's attentions, the way some systems need external validation to confirm they are working. He moved through the ballroom with extended handshakes and calibrated laughter, and when he finally located Luana near the far end of the room, his approach was smooth and unhurried, the way a man moves when he considers himself inevitable. Bennett was on the other side of the room, in conversation with the Foundation's chief medical officer. He had a clear line of sight. He watched Dwayne arrive at his wife's side, watched the familiar angle of the lean, practiced proximity, just close enough to feel private, watched him say something, saw Luana listen to it without softening. Her posture changed, not dramatically. The way a person's changes when they arrive somewhere they have been moving toward for a while without knowing it. She set her glass down on the tray of a passing server. Her voice carried only far enough. My husband has given more to this marriage than you will ever understand. I'm not interested in what you're selling, Dwayne. Not tonight, not ever. Please don't contact me again. A brief radius of quiet opened around them. The particular hush that happens in a crowded room when something honest is said at the wrong volume for the setting. A few people looked. Most looked away. Dwayne Prentice produced a sound that was working very hard to be a laugh, and walked toward the bar with the particular gait of a man recalibrating a plan that has not gone the way he expected. Bennett, across the room, watched the retreat. He did not move to intervene, did not cross the floor, did not make it a scene. He simply watched, with the specific equanimity of a man who has seen enough failing structures to recognize one on sight and return to his conversation. When Luan made her way back to him 20 minutes later, she stood beside him and said nothing about what had happened. Neither did he. The conversation moved elsewhere. They stayed another hour, said their goodbyes, walked to the car through Houston's warm spring night. In the car, she said, "Thank you for not coming over." "You didn't need me to," he said. She looked out the window at the city passing. "No," she said, "I didn't." 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in early October, Bennett Calloway and his wife closed on a house. Not the house they had been living in. That one had been sold, and the proceeds had gone toward this one, a property in the Heights, that they had found together after 3 months of looking, of arguing about closet space and shuts, and the precise location of the kitchen island, of one of them saying this one and the other saying not yet, until one afternoon in July when they had walked into a house on a corner lot shaded by old pecan trees, and both of them, independently and simultaneously, stopped talking. That was the house. It needed work. The kitchen was dated, the primary bathroom required a complete overhaul, and the backyard was overgrown in ways that would take most of a year to address. They bought it anyway, because they had agreed, in Dr. Obi's office and later in their own kitchen over coffee at 6 in the morning, that they were done inheriting the choices of previous owners, of previous versions of themselves. They were going to build something deliberately. Every decision made in common, argued over, arrived at together. The renovation took 4 months. Bennett did not hire contractors without consulting Luan. Luan did not approve materials without confirming the structural implications with Bennett. They disagreed consistently and productively about the bathroom tile, the kitchen cabinet finish, and whether the backyard needed a fence or a garden or both. And when they disagreed, they said so out loud and kept talking until they arrived somewhere neither of them had started. This was new. It was effortful. It was, both of them discovered, significantly better than what they had been doing. Dr. Obi had, by October, moved them to once a month, not because the work was finished. The work is never finished, but because they had developed, in the language of behavioral psychology, internal resources for the kinds of conversations that had previously collapsed into silence. They had learned to interrupt the cycle, to say the thing before the silence formed around it. Luan started leaving notes on Bennett's coffee mug when she left early for work. Brief, specific. The Alvarez family called. You saved their father. Don't skip lunch today. He kept every one of them. Tucked into the spine of the clinical handbook he kept on his office desk. Bennett started saying out loud the things he had previously assumed she already knew. That the gala dress had taken his breath away. That her laugh, the real one, was the thing he had been working toward for months without knowing how to name it. That when she had said yes to trying on the back porch in March, with all the careful uncertainty of someone who had been wrong before and was not sure they could survive another disappointment. That yes was the most significant thing he had heard in 5 years. Small corrections, consistently applied, the kind that compound. On the Saturday of the closing, they arrived at the house after the paperwork was signed. The movers were coming Monday. Today was just theirs. The rooms smelled like fresh paint and new wood and the particular promise of a space that had been emptied and remade. They walked through it slowly. The kitchen with the island they had argued about. The study with the built-in shelves Luane had drawn in a notebook during a session with Dr. Obi and later handed to the contractor like a document. The primary bathroom with the heated floor that Bennett had agreed to, only after Luane pointed out correctly that they were going to be here for the next 30 years, and it was a reasonable thing to want. And the back porch, wide enough for 2 chairs side by side, shaded by one of the old pecan trees, looking out over a yard that was mostly possibility at the moment they sat. The October light came in low and warm the way it does in Houston, in the fall, which is the only time of year the city feels like the rest of the country is describing when it talks about autumn. A pair of cardinals worked their way through the pecan tree above them. The neighborhood moved at Saturday morning pace. Luan had her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee from the shop 2 blocks over. She looked at the yard for a long time, then she looked at him. I almost let this go, she said. He nodded. I know, he said. So did I. The difference, she said slowly, is that you came back. She paused. I had already started arranging for you to be gone. He turned to look at her fully. The profile of a woman who had kept his text messages from the first year of their marriage, saved on an old phone in her nightstand that she no longer charged but had not thrown away. A woman who had packed the burgundy dress for every business trip for 4 years, waiting for an evening worth wearing it to. A woman who had stood in a ballroom and said plainly, without rehearsal, what was true, not because she was certain of the outcome, but because she had finally decided that certainty was not the prerequisite she had always required it to be. I should have come back sooner, he said. She turned and looked at him. You came back, she said. That counts for more than the timing. He put his arm around her shoulders. She settled against him. They sat that way while the morning advanced, and the cardinals moved on and the coffee went cold. And then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and the expression that crossed her face was not anxiety or guilt or the complicated calculus of obligation. It was simple recognition, the look of someone who has been waiting for a closing note from something that had been taking too long to end. A text from Dwayne Prentice. Doors still open. She read it once. She showed it to Bennett without commentary. He read it, said nothing. She opened the message thread, blocked the number, set the phone face down on the arm of the chair. No ceremony, no announcement. The way you close a door in a house you are not leaving. He picked up his own coffee. She picked up hers. Tell me what you want in the yard, he said. She looked out at the overgrown space, the old pecan tree, the tangled beds along the fence line, the potential in all of it. I want a garden, she said, and I want to design it with you. Then that's where we start, he said. She exhaled. Slowly. The way a person exhales when they have been holding something at chest height for longer than they realized. And the muscles finally release, and the body remembers what it feels like to set something down. There is a particular kind of quiet that arrives in a marriage not at its beginning, when everything is still being learned, and not at its peak, when the energy of discovery is sustaining itself, but at a certain point, further down the line, when 2 people have seen each other fail have been failed by each other, have made the specific choice to remain anyway, and have begun, slowly, imperfectly, with professional assistance and paper coffee cups and disagreements about bathroom tile, to build something that accounts for what they actually know. That quiet is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something that has been tested and held. It does not announce itself. It simply sits between two people on a back porch on an October morning, in a house they chose together, in a life neither of them was willing to let go of, even when for a little while they had both quietly started to.